Murray, with hundreds of Grand Prix under your belt since 1978 and the start of BBC Grand Prix, there must be some races that stand out as being highlights in that period.
There must be dozens of them, Bruce. The problem is that, without wishing to sound patronising, I've seen so many Grand Prix, motorcycle and Formula One over the years that they tend to blur together unless you stop and think about specifically which ones and give it some attention. I suppose the 1979 French Grand Prix would have to be one of them because it had such an incredible background. Turbos were introduced in 1977, largely as a result of Renault getting in with their 1.5 litre engines. And they were the laughing stock of Formula One. We used to call them the yellow teapots, and we call them the yellow teapots because we knew that they were going to blow up sometime or other, and they did. But it all came together at Dijon in France in 1979, which itself is a charismatic place, fabulous countryside, very, very interesting circuit. And places like Gévry-Chambertin and Beaune, these great wine places, literally within a stone's throwing distance of the circuit. Renault got it all right, and it all hung together. And this was the first turbo race when Jean-Pierre Jabouille won it. But nobody remembers that, because this was the race, a magical, unbelievable, incredible race, where for the last few laps, René Arnoux and the great Gilles Villeneuve, in respectively the Renault Turbo and the Ferrari Turbo, were literally banging wheels with each other in their efforts to finish second to Jabouille. It was absolutely fantastic.
And Villeneuve has had to go wide, and Arnoux on the inside as they go round Villeroy. He's got the shorter line, he's got second position. He's got second position, it's true, they bang wheels. He's off, and he's back again. René Arnoux off the circuit and back again, and now Villeneuve's in second position, and this is the last lap. And Villeneuve goes over the corrugations, and he nearly loses the front as they go up to Parabolique on the 80th and last lap.
Now, Bruce, you have actually got me going. I suppose the next of my highlights would inevitably be, amongst many, Monaco in '82. We've talked about that at great length, a fantastic race where so many people in the last 2 or 3 laps could have won it, and in the end Riccardo Patrese did. But the finish of the 1992 Monaco Grand Prix was, if anything, even more exciting, and coincidentally, or perhaps not coincidentally, it involved Nigel Mansell and Ayrton Senna. Now this time, Nigel had been in front for a long, long time, and in the closing stages of the race, he came in with what he thought was a puncture, which in fact turned out to be just a loose wheel nut. If they tightened the wheel nut up and sent him out, he would have been able to beat Senna. But that didn't happen. They replaced the tyre and wheel. Nigel rejoined behind Senna, and in one of the most exciting, electrifying, brave, daring-do, everything that you can ascribe to Mansell, drives I have ever seen, he caught Senna. But if you're in front at Monaco, there is no way you can get past. Nigel snapped and ducked and dived all round the back of the McLaren for lap after lap, but in the end, Senna won.
It's got to be a brilliantly courageous move by Nigel Mansell if he's going to win the Monaco Grand Prix for the first time, because Senna knows that he's got considerably less than half a lap between himself and his first victory of 1992. This is the swimming pool. It's only the left here, the right again, the left, and into the Rascasse, and I do not see how Mansell, even Nigel Mansell on fresh tires, is going to be able to get by. He can't. Ayrton Senna has won the Monaco Grand Prix almost certainly as he exits the Rascasse. Mansell closes, but it's too late, and Ayrton Senna wins at Monaco for the 5th time in 6 years. An incredible achievement, and I think he's blown his engine as he does so.
Hearing that again reminds me that when Senna left the Rascasse, I said, Ayrton Senna has won the Monaco Grand Prix. And then I thought, God, with your reputation for making gaffes, he hasn't yet crossed the line. And I said, almost certainly. And he did so.
And that second place at Monaco in 1992 was in Nigel's championship year, and he was the first of 2 British drivers to become world champion during your 19-year period at BBC Grand Prix.
Yeah, absolutely, Bruce. I mean, I could go on about Nigel forever. You will be relieved to hear I'm not going to do so, but I have been thinking about Nigel's incredible career through the years, and he really is a fantastic chap, because you always knew with Nigel that something was going to happen. You didn't know he did his first race for Lotus, which was Austria in 1980. But even there, it was quite typical of Nigel that he gets into the car to start the race, and there's been a fuel leak, and he's sitting in a bath of petrol. And it's equally typical of Nigel that, notwithstanding that, he drives the race until the car breaks down, suffering from petrol burns, after which he was in a very sad state indeed. But it was the first real indication in Formula One terms that we had of what a gritty and determined bloke he was and is, and what an outstanding career he got in front of him. But he wasn't all that successful, Nigel, in Formula One with Lotus, for all sorts of reasons. And I suppose the first opportunity he got really to impress us was at Monaco in 1984. A circuit which Nigel had never won at, and subsequently was never going to win at, but he turns out in the Lotus, and in quite appalling weather conditions, he unexpectedly, but quite deservedly, takes the lead, until he's going up the hill from Saint-Devote to Casino Square. And I can still hear those immortal words, Bruce, which he uttered to me in the interview afterwards. "I hit a white line, Murray, and went off." That's exactly what happened. One of his wheels hit one of the many painted lines on the track, and Nigel Mansell spun out of the race and into the Armco, dramatically to lose his first chance of winning in Formula One. And it's where his team manager, Peter Waugh, subsequently made some very derogatory remarks about Nigel Mansell, which, since this is a family tape, I won't repeat to you, but which he subsequently realised he'd got to eat. A year later was the European Grand Prix at Brands Hatch, 1985, and Nigel Mansell was racing against Nelson Piquet. Nigel Mansell went off at the start when he was racing against Ayrton Senna, and Keke Rosberg, who had also had a problem, rejoined after a spin, and he was in front of Ayrton Senna and Nigel Mansell. Rosberg slowed Senna, Mansell went through, and he did that to win his first Grand Prix at Brands Hatch in front of an adoring British crowd. It couldn't have happened at a better place.
And now he comes out of clearways and takes the checkered flag, and Nigel Mansell has won the Shell Oils Grand Prix of Europe. He is exultant, he is exuberant, and he's got every justification to be. A brilliant win for Nigel Mansell in the Williams Honda.
In 1986, things were looking very good indeed for Nigel Mansell in the Williams to win the World Championship. He'd been close to it in the past, but never quite made it. And in Australia, Adelaide, Australia, the last Grand Prix of the year, Nigel Mansell was running second behind his teammate Nelson Piquet, and all he had to do was to stay there. But I can see it vividly in my mind now. He was coming down De Ketterville Terrace, which for the race was known as the Sir Jack Brabham Straight, and suddenly he had this absolutely gigantic blowout. It's become one of the clips that's shown time and time again, and that was the thing that lost Nigel Mansell the championship in 1986.
And look at that! Out that, and colossally, that's Mansell! That is Nigel Mansell! And the car absolutely shattered. He's fighting for control, and you can see what's happened. Mansell is out of the race. Now, this could change and will change the World Championship.
What about the British Grand Prix, 1987, Silverstone? Certainly one of the most emotional and exciting occasions I've ever had the pleasure to talk about in Formula One. Nigel Mansell had a wheel balance weight come off when he was behind Nelson Piquet, his teammate, and they hated each other's guts, is a modest way of putting it. Both were very determined to win, but when Nigel rejoined the race, with 28 laps to go, he was 28 seconds behind Piquet. 3 laps from the end, Nigel had closed that gap to within sight of Nelson Piquet, and his fuel gauge was showing no fuel. Nigel passed Nelson Piquet at Stowe Corner with a quite incredible passing manoeuvre. First he jinked to the left, and Nelson Piquet protected. Nigel Mansell then shot round to the right and won the race by just under 2 seconds. And it was typical of Nigel that after the race had finished, and you can imagine how beside themselves with joy the crowd were, he gets on a police motorcycle, on the back of the police motorcycle, to do a lap in front of the crowd, because it wasn't officially allowed now. And when they got to Stowe Corner, he got off the motorcycle, and like the Pope, he knelt on the ground and kissed it at the spot where he passed Nelson Piquet. And needless to say, the crowd went absolutely raving mad. Oh dear, you've got me into my Nigel Mansell mode now. Spain, 1991. And that's given us, again, featuring Nigel, one of the most repeated television clips of all time. That incredible shot of Nigel and Senna in respectively the Williams and the McLaren coming out of the last corner and driving at 200 miles an hour side by side down to turn one with sparks coming out from under the car, neither of them prepared to give way, implacable enemies. And in the end, it wasn't Nigel that gave way, it was Senna that did so. Nigel, by the way, had sprained his ankle playing football the night before the race, and both he and his manager were so terrified about Frank Williams finding out that they sat up virtually the whole night with Sheridan Thin putting ice packs and compresses on Nigel's ankle, and he still goes out and wins the race. Now, Nigel did not win the Hungarian Grand Prix in 1992. It's one of the few races in 92 he didn't win, but he did win the World Championship. At last, after 12 years, Nigel was World Champion in, predictably and quite typically, pretty incredible circumstances. He finished second to Ayrton Senna in the McLaren Honda, but he finished second despite, in the closing stages of the race, having had a puncture which dropped him to 6th position, and if he'd finished 6th he wouldn't have won the World Championship. He had to finish higher than that. So Nigel, as ever, bless him, got his head down and went for it, and he climbed from 6th to 2nd in just a few laps and won the World Championship. And I make no excuses for the fact, Bruce, that it gave me more satisfaction than almost anything else that's happened to me in Formula One.
Where is Nigel Mansell on the last lap for second place at 6 points? That's going to give him the World Championship. Here he is. He hasn't got far to go now, because when he comes out of this right-hander, dropping downhill, he will go into turn 10, the second gear, 60-mile-an-hour corner, and he's up to the last corner now. You are about to see Nigel Mansell become World Champion of 1992 as Brundle goes off. Brundle off, and Mansell finishes, and he's World Champion.
I was almost in tears there, Bruce. My voice was breaking, not as much as it was to break on a later occasion, but I was a very, very happy and emotional man at seeing Nigel become World Champion, and talk to him afterwards.
Nigel, it's been my privilege and pleasure to talk about and follow your career since your earliest Formula 4 days. I feel almost as emotional about it as you must. You have broken your neck and discharged yourself from hospital. You have sold your house. Your your wife kept on working to enable you to race. You've had all these setbacks. You've been World Champion designate. You've been second 3 times in your career, but now you are World Champion. What is going through your mind?
I wish we wouldn't say that, Murray.
Well, he didn't fill up. I jolly nearly did, but we've been talking about the pressures of this business. Nigel was actually in a situation where he could have won the championship at the previous race, and we'd made all the plans about what to do if he did so, but he didn't win the championship. So we had to put plan B into effect after Hungary, and as soon as the race finished, I flew back to England, unusually, and the very next morning I got up early and flew to the Isle of Man and went to Nigel's fabulous home at Port Erin, and I sat on the lawn there overlooking that wonderful Isle of Man countryside that means so much to me and has always meant so much to me because of the TT and everything else. And I had a long, long interview, not only with Nigel, but with Roseanne, who had been such an enormous strength to him in his career, his charming wife. And that programme was included in a special feature that we had prepared on Nigel winning the World Championship on television that Monday evening, and it's an example of how quickly you can work and how well things can come together when everything is right.
And Murray, 4 years later, you had a chance to get a frog in your throat again when Damon Hill came through to emulate his father and become world champion.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I was talking about when I said not as emotional as I got on a subsequent occasion, because Damon is rightly, understandably, the darling of Britain. He's got the nation by its throat and a lot of the world by its throat. But it's been a very hard furrow for him to plough. His father, Graham, was killed in an aircraft accident. The family lost all the money. Damon had to come up through adversity. He raced motorcycles and then Formula Ford and Formula 3. But then he got his big chance with Williams by pressuring Frank Williams endlessly. And in 1993, after Nigel had parted from Williams in such dramatic circumstances, Damon Hill was partnering one of the greatest drivers of all time, Alain Prost. And at Britain in 1993, a race which had never been won by his double world champion father, Graham, Damon was leading the race from start to finish until I said, "This is absolutely fantastic," or words to that effect. "Damon Hill is about to do something his father never did. He's going to win the British Grand Prix." And as I said it, I saw a dirty black plume of smoke come out of the back of his engine. His engine had blown with 17 laps to go. Alain Prost won the race. Damon Hill did not. And it was a very embarrassing moment for me.
And there's an engine blowing it. It's Damon Hill. What can I or anybody say? Damon Hill's Renault engine has expired on lap 42 of the British Grand Prix, and the Englishman is not going to win. Well, his body language says bitter disappointment.
You know, they say that lightning doesn't strike the same place twice, but the Englishman didn't win at Germany in 1993 either, and that was the following race from the British Grand Prix when Damon had had such terrible luck. It was even worse in many ways in Germany because he was leading, and he was leading Alain Prost, and let's not forget what a great driver he was. He was leading Prost to within 2 laps from the end of the race. And then watching my monitor, I could hardly believe my eyes. I was getting all fired up about things, and Damon came out of the 3rd chicane at Hockenheim, went down that long 200-mile-an-hour run to the entrance to the stadium. He was 10 seconds ahead of Alain Prost, only to get a puncture and limp in. But, 3rd time lucky, it did come right at the next race, and that was Hungary. Damon finally won his first Grand Prix, and did he win it in style. He won it from the front, and not only that, but he held off Ayrton Senna until the great Brazilian had to retire. And Damon won in Hungary. It was his first Grand Prix victory, and it must have been very sweet indeed. But if 1993 was a dramatic year for Damon and all the rest of us, I suppose 1994 must have been even more so. Think of the things that happened, the number of times he came together with Michael Schumacher, and the way the season was to end so dramatically. But at Japan, at Suzuka, Damon had to do well. He had to win to stay alive in the championship. And his drive there in the wet was one of the finest I had ever seen. He was racing against Michael Schumacher in the Benetton. It was a 2-part race because the race was stopped. But in the second part, Damon magnificently stayed ahead, and he won the race, and he's never going to drive in a tougher, harder race, and he's never going to show better what a supremely brilliant driver he is. Benetton failed really because their strategy went wrong. They were relying on the fact that the race would be stopped at 75% of its distance because of bad weather. But it wasn't, and Damon's strategy was right. Damon's driving was absolutely magnificent, and he got the reward he deserved.
3.36 seconds! Damon Hill wins the Japanese Grand Prix!
So we go to wonderful, wonderful Adelaide. We all loved going there. Australia, 94, and the World Championship was very much alive. Michael Schumacher could win it, Damon Hill could win it, and as was only right, they were making the race from the front all the time until we came to that never-to-be-forgotten lap 35 out of 81, when Michael Schumacher, out of sight of Damon Hill, ran wide on the left-hand corner. Damon Hill comes round the corner to find Michael Schumacher in front of him, tries to dart through on the inside. Michael Schumacher turns across, they collide, out of the race go both of them. Michael Schumacher had won the World Championship. Bitter, bitter gall for Damon, but my goodness, he handled it in the most respectable, dignified, admirable way you could possibly imagine. But what a sensational end to the season.
Oh, out goes Schumacher. The German is out of the Australian Grand Prix, and Damon Hill only has to keep going to be world champion of 1994. But can he keep going? Because he hit Schumacher's car, and if Damon Hill has to retire and you see smoke pouring off the wheel, that will mean that Schumacher will be world champion. What an incredible development.
Well, it was an incredible development which lost Damon the World Championship in 1994, and from his point of view, 1995 wasn't much better because his rival Michael Schumacher again became world champion for the second year in succession. Now, was Damon going to win in 96 was the question. Well, it turned out to be a bitter-sweet year for him, sweet for the reasons we'll talk about in a minute. But when he went into the Belgian Grand Prix towards the end of the season, it was pretty bitter. Because, like Nigel Mansell, who had lost his drive with Williams, Damon Hill wasn't going to be driving for the team the following year either. And Belgium was a poor race. He had a bodged pit stop, as a result of which his rival Jacques Villeneuve won the race and narrowed the championship gap. So Damon could have won the championship at Monza, but he didn't because he hit a pile of tyres. He could have won it at the next race, Portugal, but he didn't because Villeneuve drove absolutely magnificently. Remember how he passed Michael Schumacher at the Parabolica? And it all came down to the last race, again, Suzuka, 1996, where Damon had won so sensationally in the past. And this time, he superbly won again. He led all the way to win his 8th race out of 16 races, his last race for Williams, to become world champion.
This is something that many people didn't think could possibly happen today. They thought Damon would drive a cautious race, but he fought. He fought from second on the grid. He passed Jacques Villeneuve. He took the lead. He stayed there. And Damon Hill exits the chicane and wins the Japanese Grand Prix.
Damon Hill, world champion. What about that?
It's just so fantastic. I can't tell you, Murray. I was driving along and I could hear you in my head. There it goes. You know, Jack's out, Murray's off, and you know, it was quite a difficult job to concentrate after I heard that Jack was out. But I wanted to win the race, you know, because I knew that was the best way to finish.
Murray, we've all watched Damon race over the years and head to that fantastic World Championship race in Japan. But you've known Damon since he was a child, since he used to follow Father Graham around the circuits. What exactly is Damon like as a person?
You know, in some ways I've got quite a lot in common with Damon. We're both sons of famous fathers, and both of us grew up in our father's shadows. And it's very easy to look at your dad, who's world famous, and think, I'd like to do better than you. And I don't think it's unfair or unreasonable to think that. I'm sure that's what Damon thought, and much as I love my father, I know that's what I thought. But Damon has had a very tough life. I have a fundamental belief that television shows people like they actually are. If someone comes across as nice on television, you'll find that in real life they're nice. And if somebody comes across as a bit dodgy on television, you'll probably find that he's not the nicest person in the world. Damon comes across as a nice, decent, honest, straightforward, dignified chap with a well-developed sense of humour, and that's exactly what he is. Anything that Damon has achieved in life, he's achieved as a result of his own guts and determination and application, and he's done an awful lot of it in the face of adversity. I'm very fond of him as a person, and I have a gigantic admiration and respect for him, and I'm very proud to be able to say that he's a friend of mine.
We've talked about the careers of two very successful British drivers, but what about Ayrton Senna?
Well, it's very difficult to sum up Senna in a few words, except to say that he's certainly one of the greatest drivers of all time. Unlike a lot of people, I wouldn't say the greatest driver of all time, because I don't think, Bruce, that you can compare drivers of one generation with another. But certainly in that magical period from 1984 until his tragic death in 1994, Senna was one of the top three, arguably the best of all, and a very, very complex personality. Came from Brazil, and to come from Brazil to Europe in itself was quite outstanding, because he left a very comfortable existence, wealthy family, substantial background, good climate, all that sort of thing, to come and rough it in Britain, to drive in Formula Ford and to live near Snetterton, which must have been quite a culture shock after Sao Paulo. But he made his mark in Formula Ford and Formula 3, and I always found him to be a gigantically deep-thinking, and without wishing to sound patronising, impressively intelligent man who thought about everything. I interviewed him at virtually every race, and you would ask him a question, and sometimes he would think for about 20 seconds before he answered the question, which actually is quite a difficult thing to do, because your reactions are to respond immediately to an interviewer. But he wasn't like that. He would think out very carefully what he wanted to say, and I'd be thinking, gosh, he hasn't understood the question, or he hasn't heard the question, or he's not going to bother to answer it. And then suddenly he would come out with the definitive answer, totally authoritative, calm, full of reason and good sense. He was also a chap with a well-developed sense of humour, if you gave him the opportunity. I mean, you and I could go on about the relationship between Ayrton Senna and Gerhard Berger when they were together at McLaren for ages, I'm quite sure. But he really started to make his name when he drove for Toulon in 1984 in a car which hadn't got a prayer of winning a race, and it didn't, even with Ayrton Senna in command. But as a result of what he did, he then got the Lotus Drive in 1985, and I was there in Portugal at Estoril when he won his first Grand Prix in the most hideous weather conditions you can possibly imagine. Everybody was spinning off, even the top men of the day, except Senna, who not only drove carefully around the circuit, making sure he stayed on it, but incredibly quickly. And he came in and he won his first Grand Prix in enormously emotional circumstances. Peter War, his team manager, nearly went berserk. And then the years rolled on. It was quite clear that in 86 and 87, and he won 2 races each of the 3 years he drove for Lotus. And finally he got to a team where he could win the World Championship in 1988 with McLaren, in partnership with Alain Prost, a partnership which was subsequently to turn very sour indeed. But at Monaco in 88, Senna had got the lead. He'd got a massive lead with 12 laps to go. He was 53 seconds ahead of Alain Prost. But the wily, determined, experienced Frenchman, knowing that his only chance was to keep pressuring Senna, did exactly that. And even Senna let it get to him, and he went off, came down the hill from the Portier, turned into the tunnel, lost it at the approach to the tunnel, went into the Armco, and bitterly reproached himself, disappeared to his flat, wasn't seen again the rest of that day. But he did go on and win the World Championship, and he won 8 of the 16 races this year to start becoming one of the greatest drivers we've ever seen.